on the devolution of the adult education budget to the Greater London Authority. Yeah. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussions using hashtag, which is hashtag either AssemblyEdu or, as I said earlier, online, a hashtag EduPanel. And I will be looking out, and a member of staff will be looking out, and if anybody hashtags us any interesting questions, we're happy to put them to the panel members. Okay, so thank you for that. Let's go to item 1 of the meeting. Is to we've got to guest apologies. We've just got a short item of formal business to go through before we get to you. So can I ask the clerk if we have any apologies for today?
No, we do not, Chair.
Thank you very much. And can I go to item 2, declarations of interest? And can I ask the panel to note the list of offices held by members as set out on the table at item 2 as disclosable pecuniary interest? Can I ask members if they have any additional interest in specific items on the agenda? I see none, thank you. And then can I thank the committee assistant for the minutes, and can I ask members to agree the minutes of our last meeting held on 29th November 2017. Thank you very much. And also, can I ask that we note the list of outstanding actions? Noted. Thank you very much. Okay, this brings us to our main item of business today, the devolution of the adult education budget to the Greater London Authority. I understand it's around £400 million annually, which is equal to the sum spent by other functional bodies that are like fire, part of the GLA, so an incredibly important budget. It will fund adult education services with the aim of providing adults with the skills they need to enter into or progress in work or further learning. The Department of Education is planning to devolve the adult education budget from the Education and Skills Funding Agency to the GLA in 2019 for the start of the 2019/20 academic year. The Assembly has been consulted on the devolution, has submitted a formal response to the consultation, and I can say that it will be this panel that will be in charge of scrutiny of this area of work. So can I please welcome our guest today, Jules Pipe, CBE, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills, Colin Stanbridge, CEO, London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Arinola, Edeh, Principal, Westminster Adult Education Service, Gerry McDonald, Principal Group Principal, New City College, and Andrew Gower, Principal, Morley College, and Maria Thompson, Principal, Havering College of Further and Higher Education. And members received a briefing about your backgrounds, so they know they're up to speed in terms of what you've released to the public about your professional background. Let's go then to the first question, which is in my name. Right, and the first question is to the Deputy Mayor. And we've got 3 sections of questions. We've got GLA responsibilities. We've got a second section on impact on adult education providers. And we've got a third section on empowering Londoners. So this first section on the GLA responsibilities, can I ask Jules, following devolution of the adult education budget, what will the GLA new responsibilities be?
Well, Chair, as you said, the
DFE is devolving the post-19 budget to combined authorities and the Mayor of London. It's probably going to be nearer 300 million than 400 million by the time two things are taken into account. One, some of the areas that aren't coming across, plus also the reduction that's already taken place in the budget. I think we've been talking about 400 million for about the last three years, but there's been a bit of erosion of that one way or the other, so it's probably just over 300 million pounds. So it will fall to us to disperse those funds in line with the Mayor's skills strategy, which we consulted upon until the beginning of this year. We'll be publishing the strategy in around May, the final strategy, and that will inform how we would disperse that funding to institutions and providers from 2019-20. However, we've got to be very mindful of stability to the sector, so I'm sure in that first year it will be very much a lift and shift of funding so that institutions won't be disrupted, and it would be an evolution of funding. As some of the panel members would have heard me say before, there are something like 400 different providers in London. 300 of them, there are 400 providers to London, but 300 of those aren't based in London. So there's a significant amount of subcontracting that inevitably must be going on. So I'm sure all those 300 haven't got outposts within London to deliver that. Some might have, but not all. So there's a significant amount of untangling to do. And clearly there's been a lot of work that the team here have been putting in place to take on that responsibility, to both deliver, to spend that money and do it in line with the strategy. So as the Assembly members will know, there's been a proposal to expand the skills team here from one that's kind of a strategic policy-based team into one that is fit for delivery.
Thank you. And after this meeting, we can get some sort of organogram about the team that is working with you, and then we can append that to the discussion that we're having today. But can you just briefly tell us about the internal structure and systems that are in place or will need to be added in terms of governance of the, can we call it the AEB? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Adult
absolutely.
Education Budget?
Yes, I mean that in itself probably needs a small organogram. There are overall I mean it has to be borne in mind, I should say up front, that of course the Mayor of London is unique compared to sort of combined authorities, that the Mayor takes the decision and is advised by boards as opposed to the boards taking the actual decision. So all these things are in effect advisory to the Mayor. But immediately, but the apex of that advisory framework would be two things: both the Adult Education Programme Board, which would be made up of myself as the Mayor's representative on skills, and the borough leaders, and there 3 or 4 other representatives drawn from the LEP business, someone from with leadership experience within further education, and that would oversee generally the direction of the programme. But beneath that there would be both sub-regional skills and employment boards for the 4 sub-regions, and they would feed in. Obviously there'd be an officer working group as well, and then a provider advisory group as well for the providers to be on. And also, we haven't set this up yet, but a sector skills board as well, to be able to inform inform us of about skills gaps. Obviously, that's on top of all the research and other things that are going on into those very things. It's probably one of the things that we're always talking about, isn't it, Colin, about skills gaps. But to actually have, we'll also have this, say, the formal board that will actually input and potentially probably oversee and guide some future work on identifying skills gaps.
Okay. And as with
I'm sorry, one final thing.
Yeah.
At the top, but it's not a kind of a top of the pyramid, but it is feeding in at a very high level to the GLA Corporate Investment Board. It's actually the grouping that will make the decisions on funding, to the individual funding decisions to each provider, and actually producing that documentation that then will be agreed by the Corporate Investment Board and ultimately signed off by the Mayor.
Okay. And what's that body called?
That one's the internal AEB programme board. So you've got two AEB programme boards. You've got the general one, which will be a governance one for input from boroughs, and then you'll have the internal one, which effectively is the mechanistic one that's determining actual payments.
And is there an understanding that all the notes of all these boards will be subject to scrutiny
in all the usual GLA way,
and
they
available as per any other activity within the GLA? Because some people don't appreciate that level of openness and scrutiny.
Well, it's the standard GLA transparency.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, just then share with us about the borough's role, because you talked about borough leaders being on the, if I can call it, the APB. Is that right?
Yeah, they will be leaders, but they won't be there as leaders. They will be there as the borough, the sub-regional skills representatives. So each sorry, did I say boroughs? No, I did say sub-region. Mm-hmm. So we have 4 sub-regions in London. Mm-hmm. With each of them has a skills and employment board, and so it will, I would imagine, invariably it will be the chair of each of those skills and employment boards who those sub-regions will send to sit on this. So that's 4 of those places, and the 5th one will...
They'll be elected members, you're saying?
Yes, yeah, I'm sure they will end up being leaders, because in each case the skills and employment boards of each sub-region to date has always been chaired by a leader from the boroughs within that sub-region. And so those 4 leaders. So, sorry for my confusion, but it's because I know in my head they're all likely to be leaders, I refer them to be as leaders, and then it makes it sound as if individual boroughs are sending them, but they're not. They're being sent by their sub-regions.
No, because that was my concern, because you don't really want to create a situation of pork barrel sort of discussions where each 30, how many boroughs do we have? 32. Come in to argue in
and the Corporation of London.
And the Corporation, 32 plus 1, arguing just for their specific small area.
Exactly. They're there to represent the sub-regions and very much in a strategic way. It shouldn't get down into individual college allocations and things like that. It should be a strategic discussion. And so along with those 4, there will be a 5th leader, but again, not representing their individual borough. Actually, even more widely, that they'll be the whatever it would be called at the time, because their portfolios can change from time to time. But the London Council's lead on skills. At the moment, I think it's something like skills, investment and Brexit or something at the moment, but whoever their skills lead is at London Councils will also be the 5th representative from local government.
Okay, that's great. And then, has any witnesses got anything to comment so far?
Sorry, Chair, could I just add, just for completeness, so Skills for London task force member. There'll be one. As I said, someone providing the provider perspective and an additional business member.
Okay. What are the sort of key risks? I mean, you talked about the approach of lift and shift would make sense to prevent any unnecessary disruptions, because that must be a real risk. But what are the key risks have you identified with the devolution programme?
We are suffering from a slowness in release of information from the DFE, and we have been pushing hard for the release of that information that would help us plan. So details of contracts that are currently existing between providers and the DFE. So that's probably the biggest problem that we have at the moment. That's the key risk for us at the moment.
Okay. Colin, from what you've heard from the Deputy Mayor, I know that the business communities in a borough, in your organisation, may have had close relationships with their colleges, whether it was through joint projects with European funding and all sorts of funding. What are your concerns about the key challenges and what you've heard from the Deputy?
The first thing I'd like to say is that we campaigned for and are delighted about the devolution of this budget, whether it's 400 million or 300 million. It's great to get that, and we think it's incredibly important that this works, because we hope it'll be followed by a tsunami of devolution to London, the boroughs and London government. So I think to be serious, I think there's a serious point about if we don't make a success of this, it'll make it even more difficult than it already is, and boy is it difficult, to devolve other powers, other budgets to London, all of which should be devolved, and we have banged on about it in London Finance Commission and everybody else about this for many years. And we're also delighted that it comes under Jules' regime, because we have a great deal of faith in Jules to be able to deliver a successful...
No pressure then.
No pressure at all.
Thank you, Colin.
No. So, we're absolutely in favour of it. I think what we are concerned about is it's a long-term concern. If you talk to our members, you will always find education and skills in the top three of their concerns. It's obviously vital to them because, as we all know, every business depends on its workforce and the skills that workforce has. So they're very concerned about skills. But there has been a feeling for many years, and certainly I've experienced this from members, of a sort of a not gulf, but certainly a chasm between business and the educational establishments. Whether that's right or wrong, and I've had lots of arguments with all sorts of educationists about this. There's certainly a feeling. There's also a confusion about qualifications and what they actually mean. That's gone on for ages. We hope this is an opportunity now to get rid of that difference. We hope that when the money is devolved, and maybe not in the first year, but certainly perhaps starting off in the first year, that there is a really transparent way of business being able to contribute to that. We see that LEAP and the Mayor's Business Advisory panel are involved, and I'm just looking over your shoulder. I see the London Business Board is also, which I was going to ask about that.
We can supply this to the panel later, the organogram of where it fits in with the other boards that have been set up in the
and we're very, as I chair the London Business Board, I'm very keen for us to take part in that, because we believe that businesses should have a strong voice in the sorts of skills that will be needed going forward, especially at this time, because if you look at our latest economic survey, the inability to recruit, even before we leave the EU and leave, and we have a problem about all those EU workers who may or may not feel they want to stay, even before that is happening, there is a skills shortage, obviously, amongst businesses, which is having a huge impact on their ability to do well, and also having a downward impact on business confidence. So we find it very important. So as this goes on, we'd like to find out more about how we can help shape. I mean, obviously up to, we're not educationists, but we are the sort of perhaps part of the end game of this, to be able to find more people work and have the right skills to be able to match those together. So that's what we would want to pursue as we go forward, how we can get involved. We're already working at the moment with London councils. We have a 3-year project with London councils to try and get the views of business and boroughs more aligned. And this year we'll start to focus on education and skills. So we hope we'll be able to feed in that sort of information. What we want, obviously, is I keep saying this, we're fed up with being consulted. We don't need to be consulted ever again about anything. We want to participate where we can actually make a difference. And so I'm delighted the London Business Board there, because we think that the London Business Board, for those people who don't know, brings together obviously ourselves as the London Chamber, the FSB, the IOD, London CBI and London First. So we cover the waterfront, I think it's fair to say, of businesses across the capital in every sector. And I can certainly speak for the Chamber, but I'm sure I can speak for the other organisations, is that they want to play an active part in making sure that the money is spent in a way that is of benefit to London as a whole.
And part of that benefit, obviously, is also about lifelong learning and how that plays to well-being and the whole adult community learning side of the budget. But I do think it's absolutely important, it's crucial, as Colin said, that that which is destined for training and skills purposes, and with employment relevance, we've got to ensure that it is relevant to employment in outcomes, and that's the key thing about this. It's ensuring that we actually bring in a regime of monitoring and measuring, so that can inform our decisions in further rounds of funding in the future.
Okay, before I hand over to my colleague David Curtin, I just want to get on record something I think you've told us about before, and that is the percentage of the pot. There's a percentage of the pot that you will have some flexibility over. It was in relation to areas that clearly their needs have not been met, like the post-16 offer for young people with SEND and sort of new areas that there are. I thought that we'd been told that there was a proportion of your budget that has some flexibility for you to now look at specific populations.
I know what you mean. Although this is post-19 funding.
That's post-19.
Post-19, but because the AEB budget is post-19. But what you may be remembering is that, and this goes back to the 400 providers and the subcontracting, is that we're confident that there will be unnecessary management costs contained within that amount of subcontracting and churning of money. So we would hope that bringing a more rational approach to the disbursement of the funds would mean that we would be able to make some savings there and recycle that saved money into further such as that. So
yeah, and that's still the intention.
that's definitely the intention.
Yeah, and it's lovely. And in following on from this area, we've got Assembly Member Twycross.
It was just a very quick question really to Jules Pike, but sort of bringing in Colin Stanbridge as well, which is about the sort of apprenticeship levy. And obviously you've literally just got this money devolved to you. Would there be an argument for some sort of, even if partial devolution of the apprenticeship levy money? Because actually at the moment we can see that although it's a good idea in principle, in practice it isn't delivering the sort of apprenticeships that it was intended to, and actually that partnership between policymakers and the higher education and further education sector and business maybe needs a bit more coordination than actually it was envisaged when the policy was set in place. So should we now be campaigning for devolution of the apprenticeship levy as well?
Yeah, I think the business and the
Absolutely.
GLA, the administration, would be at one on wanting that. It's
I
something.
mean, we'll let you start getting into this bit first, and then it obviously will take a while for us to get there. But I think, would that be something you'd welcome?
Absolutely, it's
Yeah.
something that we're already pushing for.
Yeah.
And certainly just even flexibility for
Yeah.
employers regardless of devolution is something that we're pushing for. The 10% that can be used at the moment further down the chain, we think that should be widened, and also the other thing to be widened would be the way in which it could be spent. There are plenty of people who are sadly not apprenticeable, and we need to bring them nearer to the labour market. In the same way we talk about bringing people nearer to the labour market, there are people who need to be brought nearer to being apprenticeable, and so that goes to soft skills in particular, and transferable skills. And actually that does remind me of another point to the chair, actually, that in answer to your previous question, another pot of money which suddenly occurred to me from Fiona's question was ESF funding as well. Yes. So there's £135 million of ESF funding which wouldn't have actually been usable without a match, and the transfer of the devolution of AEB to us allows us to use that as match. So we potentially can draw on another £135 million. And that would again speak to the kind of programmes that are difficult to find funding for at the moment.
That's absolutely right. We would absolutely want to campaign and have campaigned for devolution of the apprenticeship levy. I have to say there's a very mixed response from our members about the apprenticeship levy. I mean, I think there's a growing understanding that businesses need to do more in the skilling of their workforce. I think the construction sector is a particularly good example of that. That as the skill shortages get greater and greater and greater, businesses do concede that they need to do more. I think the problem with the apprenticeship levy is, yes, it seems a good idea on the surface, except it's another tax, as many people would see it. But also, we're discovering from big and small members that it is perverting the way they train their workforce, because they're having to use that money that they would have used to train the workforce. And we actually had the top civil servant who was administering the apprenticeship levy to a meeting at the chamber with some of our members, to point out to him that there were a very large international company and a very medium-sized company, London company, who both had the same problem, that they were moving money from their training budgets because they had specific needs into the to pay for the apprenticeship levy. And this seems to us to be an absurd situation. So the ability to have flexibility for London, as it were, to have that flexibility to decide, I think would be very useful.
Gerry, please, you wanted to come in earlier.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to refer back to the point you made about the extent to which there'll be flexibility over this budget. And I think one of the key issues, just to be cognizant of, it's not I'm making a point about it, just saying simply for awareness, is that there are a whole range of entitlements which are attached to that budget, which provide, there are legal entitlements, particularly around access to level 2s or level 3 qualification. It was something that you mentioned, learners who throughout the system maybe haven't got to that level of qualification yet. Certainly I don't think there is any intention to argue for the removal of those entitlements. But once you start to say how much money does that sort of take away in terms of leaving amounts of flexibility, if you add in English and maths into that, which is a big component and a really important need across London. And I think also if you add in ESOL, and we were really encouraged by all the messaging coming out from the GLA around how important ESOL is, and it's a really big need across the city. I can only speak for my own college, but in our case, and we have about 14 million of AEB a year, 73% of our budget goes on those headings, so level 2, level 3, English and maths and ESOL. And it's probably not representative, but to some extent it might be. It's not completely unrepresentative. You know, we cover 3 boroughs. That leaves, if those things are maintained, that the legal entitlements would have to be honoured, it does leave relatively smaller pot to have that flexibility to do the sorts of things that Colin has mentioned. Not that they're not desirable outcomes, I just think there needs to be some sort of realism around how much money would be available for distributing on that basis.
Yes, no, thank you for that. Assemblymember Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just go back to you, Jules, and ask you about the costs of administering the new system. I mean, how do you think the GLA will meet those costs of your new responsibilities?
We are talking to the government about an implementation and administration budget, and we are due to receive about 250,000 match funding from DFE for costs incurred to date. So I, being ever hopeful, I'm hoping that that's an indicator that the fact that they've met implementation costs, a big proportion of implementation costs to date, that they will be equally as accommodating in helping to cover admin costs. Otherwise, the first call on it would be that money that I talked of earlier, that we're saving, that we'll be looking to save on the friction costs of subcontracting.
Okay. Will there'll be ongoing administration costs as well, won't there? So
yes, to both disperse the funds but also monitor and manage contracts, and we would probably do it at a greater level of scrutiny than is currently undertaken nationally. So at the moment it's pretty much a disbursement and very little subsequent monitoring of certainly not to the degree that we'd like in terms of outcomes. And so that's why we will have to set up our we are still talking to the DFE about using their systems, but we may end up setting up our own.
So you mean with your own sort of staff here?
Yeah, it definitely will involve our own staff, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks. And if I could move on to you, Colin, from
yes.
the Chamber of Commerce, and just ask you, what do you think are the current gaps in the skills offer to London's population at the moment, and what do you think the GLA can do to improve on perhaps specific areas of skills which are missing?
Well, I think given our onward movement towards megacity status of 9-10 million people, housing is still top of our agenda with transport, and I think that one of the things that we did, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, was a skills construction pipeline work on the people coming through, and discovered that there was a huge disparity between the number of people, dry liners, those sort of people that we would need to build the 50,000 homes a year that probably we need in London, and probably still need even despite Brexit. So I think construction skills would be an area, and I think that construction skills would probably feature quite heavily, Jules, in your thinking, especially as many of those construction skills at the moment provided from people who are outside, come from outside the UK, and many from the EU. So yes, so I think that's going to be. I think digital skills are obviously something that many companies tell us are difficult. There's been a lot of noise about coding in schools and all of that, and I think some progress has been made in those skills. But I think again, it's an area where we have a very vibrant tech community, and there's no doubt that finding those skills. What's worrying for us is that when we do we survey 500 companies of every size in every borough every quarter as part of our economic survey work, which feeds into the British Chambers of Commerce, but also is just specifically about London. It's the largest survey of any business group in the capital. And, sorry, it's my son wanting money, probably. And it is worryingly high across the board, the inability to fill gaps. So I would pick out construction skills and digital skills, but I think there's many other areas that many of my members would say. But those are the ones that come to mind.
I mean, as you know, the Mayor's got programmes on each of those with the Construction Skills Academy and the
Yes.
and on digital skills. But I suppose other areas I'd add in are
Hospitality and leisure.
hospitality and leisure and health and social care. Those
Yes,
are the
exactly.
those
Yes,
are the
exactly.
two that I would add in. Again, heavily dominated by EU and other nationality workers. Interestingly, I mean, those two areas that are served to a very large extent by colleges, health and social care and catering. And I suppose that's an area where we'd be looking at where although the money is already being spent, but it's where we can start adding some value about ensuring that what is being taught is what. Because the colleges can do an absolutely excellent job in delivering the course, and people could be well qualified in, reach a high standard in that qualification. But if industry thinks it's moved on since that qualification, it takes a long time, doesn't it, to get some of these qualifications agreed, ratified, before they can be taught. And some of these areas are fast moving and changing. And so that's an area where...
If you take construction skills, if you take the trend towards prefabrication in factory building of houses and then construction on site, we need to make sure that if that really is the future of house building, that's part of what is being taught.
I see, Maria, you want to come in and say something?
I just might respond in terms of the issue around construction. We've started work with the London Borough of Havering with the Beam Park Regeneration and Housing Zone, and we're also working with Notting Hill as a developer and L&Q. And we, as part of the Section 106 agreement, we'll be providing apprentices. So I think it is much easier to work with the large employers. 90% of our employers are SMEs, and those are the ones that it's more difficult to reach into to respond to the skills needs.
And also what we're trying to do is we've been long campaigning to try and bring more small builders into the sort of construction pipeline, as it were, because we feel that there are the bigger builders, and we have one of the biggest as our president in Tony Pidgley of Berkeley, and Tony's the one that keeps saying that actually, it's relatively easy for a big company because they can get through the bureaucracy, and in fact the bureaucracy helps them in some ways. I mean, that's what we'll say. But actually, they're never going to be able to build the volume that we need, and we need an army of small builders, I think it's fair to say.
But I just want to pick up on something you said earlier, Gerry. I think you mentioned a figure of 72% of your budget was spent on level 2 and 3 apprenticeships, English, Maths and ESOL. Whereas, Colin, you mentioned about construction and digital skills. And what I understand from the construction industry is they're crying out for people with level 4 and level 5 apprenticeships. I mean, there's a real skills gap in that level of qualification. And if that's only the smallest amount, the less than a third, perhaps, if we use Gerry's figure, is going on that kind of level, how can we increase that kind of level if that's where the real demand is? That's what we really need to focus on, isn't it? Would you agree with that? And if you do, how would we do that?
I would certainly agree with that. I think the difficulty is you're moving into loan territory then, aren't you, in terms of the way in which those courses are funded now. I mean, if there's anything GLA can do to shift that would be incredibly helpful, but those courses are now funded through loans rather than through funding.
The student gets
the student would be loan funded, yeah.
They would get sort of from the student loans company.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Right.
Advanced learner loans.
Advanced learner loans, yeah.
Right. So that's a whole other issue.
A whole other issue.
It's another issue, another area that we're looking at at the moment, and it was one of the things the Mayor has pledged to do about promoting them. But at the moment, we're exploring sort of the difficulties that or the apparent unattractiveness of them and what the barriers are to people taking them.
Would that be outside of the adult education budget then?
That would be an additional to it.
Yes. So at the moment, is that funded by the DFE if they are? But then they need to top it up. Okay, right. So that is. Yeah, okay, that's a shame. Okay, I've got one. I'll just ask my last question here, but again to Colin, if I could. I mean,
sorry, I'm just looking at what our skill. The reason I'm not reading the newspaper, but I'm trying to look up our construction skills report and to give you some figures on.
Yeah, that'd be great in a minute. That's fantastic. But I mean, could you tell us? I mean, that the GLA is going to need information from businesses and providers for strategic planning. I mean, you did mention the London Business Board earlier. I mean, would that be the primary method of engagement, or are there other?
Well, I'm sure there are other members, and we know that the Mayor's Business Advisory Board is going to be involved, and is LEAP the LEP? Is it? It is, yes. The LEP, which of course concentrated on skills under previous regimes. We're very happy that all of that. The more, the better. What I hope that the role we could play is to try and synthesise the views. I mean, one of the problems, Jules will know this, and he's done our round table, so you'll know, is you get lots of individual businesses with lots of individual needs, and they'll all quite rightly trumpet them, especially if you're an SME. An SME, is fighting for survival, therefore they are absolutely focused on what they need. We would argue that one of the benefits of business groups is that we can synthesize those views. We can smooth out the ups and downs, and we would be absolutely willing to work with whatever part of this would be necessary to try and give an overview. As I say, we're working with London councils anyway, doing survey work with I think 1,000 businesses with Comres over the next year. So we'd want to feed that in. The London Business Board comes together because we're all competitors for members, but we have always come together on things where we think that we should, for the benefit of London, work together. So, for example, Crossrail 1, Crossrail 2, the Olympics. We worked incredibly closely together, and I think skills would be absolutely one of those things where the fact that you could have the CBI, London First, ourselves, the FSB, the IOD, I think you could come up with a machine, and there would be a great deal of willingness, I'm sure, to create that machine. Our fear, of course, is that we just get consulted about it rather than asked to do something. Our plea would be to ask us to do something. If we have to try and find money for it, fine, let's try and find money for it. But don't just say, here's a survey, here's a questionnaire for your members, whatever it is. Because I think we've got much more to offer than just that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going on to the second section about the impact on adult education providers. So we'll get our other witnesses engaged in this one. Assembly Member Hall, would you like to start this section?
Yes, thank you. If I can start to Jules, please. Will there be changes to funding and contracting rules or systems, and can the GLA innovate contracts?
The quick answer is to the last question, and it turns out that we can't. That affects the independent providers. So it doesn't affect such the people around this table who are grant funded. That's fine. That can go straight across. But those contracts with all the other independent providers in and outside London, those can't be novated and will have to be effectively new contracts from when we take over.
There'll be a financial implication to that all round, won't there? New contracts have to be negotiated?
I mean, it'll be procured. It'll be a procurement. So yes, amounts could go up, down, whatever. But yeah, they would be procured. New procurements.
And how do you? Well, to you again, Jules. How do you shift funding to outcome-based commissioning system, and what will it mean for providers? And when will the changes be implemented?
Well, I mean, currently providers are paid largely on numbers, student enrolments, as well as retention of those numbers, and outputs in terms of qualifications achieved. So that is kind of raw figures, not actually outcomes, which for us would be particularly on the element that is vocational. Did they get a job and sustain it? And that's the gold standard that everyone is aspiring to. So we're hoping that in the medium term, I say it won't be day one, but we'll be able to shift each year more and more on the vocational side to pay more on outcomes. Actually across the board really we'd want to, but obviously it's even harder to determine outcomes on the more on the non-vocational ones, the more sort of health and well-being and adult community learning activity. So we would want to judge it. So we'd want to judge the vocational outcomes more on both obviously into work, progression into work, but also progression in work as well. Yeah.
Could I just make a point, just to emphasise that point about outcomes? We obviously, that's where we would want to try and help to make sure that we're getting the information about those outcomes, because we've always felt that, I mean, I remember when I was early in the job, and I've been in the job too long now, with the London Development Agency, being told about the thousands and thousands of training courses that they were funding. Very good. And then I asked, so how many jobs came out of that? And the answer was, well, we don't record any of that.
And it's the most important thing.
And that to us is the most. It's not. There's a danger of business groups sounding as if they just want to create a sausage factory for this great machine of business that's going to chew people up and that sort of. I enjoyed my time at school and university and as an experience in its own, and so education should be that as well. But also, the outcomes of how many people get jobs strikes me as something that fundamentally needs to be recorded. It may not be the only, as Jules pointed out, it may not be the only thing you want to evaluate in terms of whether things are successful or not, but sure as heck it's got to be pretty well up there as the outcomes.
Absolutely.
Not least because so, again, employers are saying so often that what's crucial to them and is often missing is that, okay, they might have the qualification in the particular course, but they lack the soft skills. And even if they have the basic soft skills, they can turn up, they're washed and brushed up and all fine and they're articulate. But then there are the kind of more advanced soft skills, ability to negotiate and things like that, that perhaps that they haven't picked up throughout their education, and disadvantages them in the labour market. So they might be presentable, they might have the qualification, but it's still not what the employer is looking for.
And that's where business can play a part. We've started about 2 years ago a schools programme of taking our members into schools just for almost those soft skills. So, for example, what are they looking for in a CV? What are they looking for in terms of interview technique? And they're the best people. And the interesting thing is, I'm always, because SMEs are such on the edge and, in terms of their businesses and the time they have to put into their businesses. But I always remember, again, when I took over, we had a scheme to get school governors into school. And I thought, they're not going to do that. We beat the numbers in the first year in terms of school governors, because education plays such a part in business. And I think with the right leadership, bringing businesses into schools to try and to further education, to try and help develop those soft skills and also evaluate whether those soft skills are the right ones, could be something where we could play an active part.
I agree with that. Now, if I can bring in the providers, please, if that's all right. I'm hoping I know the answer to this. Do you welcome the devolution of the adult education budget to the GLA, firstly, and how is it going to affect the way you plan for and provide adult education services? So if I go around the table.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
I'm probably in the wrong place to say this because I'm a passionate Londoner, but no, we don't. Well, I personally don't. I think that there is a danger of creating an unstable provider base, and our commissioner, our F&HE commissioner, actually quoted yesterday, it's very difficult to persuade employers about what we do as a country if we have different arrangements for skills in devolved areas to non-devolved areas. I think that is a difficult place to be. So I will say that's our, I'd much rather have a single contracting process rather than having to contract differently for my students who do not have a London postcode. I think that is a difficult situation to place providers in. And that may just be my view, but that is a view that we feel is a concern. However, we are political animals too, and we accept the political reality of the situation, and we accept that, I think we'd probably also want to say that we're very complimentary about the way in which Jules and his team have gone about engaging with providers, and we think done it incredibly well, very open, very listening, very responsive to the provider base and the sorts of challenges that we face. But there is always going to be a different approach that's going to grow up in London, and maybe for good London-based reasons, but that, I think, my view is, and it's my view, that makes it harder to sell the UK abroad when you talk about, well, London does this, but actually our Manchester office does something a little bit different. Now, maybe as Londoners, Gerry, that maybe shouldn't concern us, but on a broad UK perspective, that I think should concern us if we have different approaches to skills, elsewhere in the system. The only other thing I'd just like to very briefly comment on before my colleagues is that F&HE's in a slightly precarious state. I wouldn't wish to overstate that, because then, I don't believe that we should beat ourselves up. I think we're an incredibly proud and strong sector, but our financial position is not the strongest. And since we've had no rate increases for many, many years now, we're just about at the end of our road as far as efficiency savings are concerned. While we support fully that we should be absolutely held accountable that our students get into work, no question about that at all, we would have concerns if there was some sort of monetary incentive attached to that, rather than the things which we work towards at the moment. And the reason I'll say that is, I think there's two things. First of all, we operate on wafer-thin margins, fractions of a percent. And if we are waiting for some delayed payment for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to make sure that our learners have got into work, that could be the type of thing that pushes colleges over the edge and could further damage cash flow and viability. So we just some note of caution around that. We are a fragile sector in aggregate around our finances. In aggregate, the entire F&HE sector is in deficit and has been for several years. I think the second thing that would concern us around those things is we want our resources, and also the GLA's resources, to be about getting people skills. What we don't want to have to do, in exactly the same way as members wouldn't want money to be too heavily absorbed by administration and those sorts of things. You want the money to go to the front line, to use that phrase. We want to put our money into the front line. What we don't want to do is to have to create large administrative bureaucratic systems to track people for a long time, many months later, that they got into work. Not saying at all that we don't think that's a desirable outcome, but if it takes money away from training and educating people, we think there should be a lot of caution around that. What we would welcome is a much greater dialogue around the utility of what we do and how instrumental that is in getting people into work. And that's absolutely the right thing to be discussing. It's the right thing to be held accountable for. We just note some caution around resources getting sucked into that and around the extent to which it could affect the provider base.
You do accept, though, that we're all judged out there in business and everywhere on our outcomes, one way or another, and therefore there has to be some sort of scrutiny about the outcomes of your education, because it could be
completely.
That your your students don't get jobs, somebody else's students do get jobs. Therefore, that has to be taken into some consideration. I accept your point completely. You don't want a whole load of bureaucratic nonsense. But equally, there's taxpayers' money going into everything. We've got to make sure that the provision is getting to the end game, which is getting people into
And in the way in which you've phrased that, I would agree with everything you said. It's absolutely we should be accountable. I think our concern is when it becomes mechanistic and X% of your funding is attached to it. I think there are dangers in that. When it's, and we are already accountable, my colleagues will talk about their experience with Ofsted, and we absolutely have to demonstrate to Ofsted that we are getting people into work. The conversations we have with our funders are already about those things. I'm just sounding a note of caution about it becoming a mechanistic and highly moneyed, because it will skew behaviour.
Yeah, but obviously if you have to do that for Ofsted, there's things in place that can prove that you are getting them into work.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we would welcome it, and we'd want to make it work. As a College of Further and Higher Education, my concerns are I've already got a number of different inspection regimes and different audit regimes, so I'd be cautious about any additional bureaucracy or different systems and procedures that would add to our costs, particularly for implementing a new system. I think that what I would welcome is if there is any degree of flexibility, taking off any limitations, so that we could be inventive and creative about new ways of spending the budget. I'll give you an example of something that we do at the college already. We've got a rail training academy, and we work with an independent training provider called Cat 1 Safety. Very intensive 5-week course. It takes people off the unemployment register with JCP, and they work on full-size rail equipment rather than any sort of limited or simulated environment. 84% of those learners go into full-time employment because they're guaranteed an interview with Network Rail. And that's fantastic, but they still have to get a qualification. Now, I'm not saying that that isn't valid, but to look at that type of programme, if you could be creative around those sort of skills, because it's those entry-level skills that actually get people onto the skills escalator, because in due course we'll be looking at apprenticeships, rail signalling, and the levels 4 and 5 that you mentioned earlier. So I think it's a good thing, but we're realistic about the problems that might come with actually implementing a new system on top of all the other systems that we have.
Well, maybe the new systems can take account into the other systems, and you can all work together to make it easier for you, but to get the outcomes recorded as we would need.
I'd like to say, first of all, that we are enjoying our increased engagement with the Deputy Mayor and his team. In terms of my representation of the Institutes for Adult Learning, I mean, I'm representing a particular subset of the funded providers in London that are focused on adult learning. So we're thinking about employability, but we're thinking about some of the social impact of learning that Jules has mentioned in his remarks earlier. I think we're committed as institutions to the impact of learning. I guess we're just aware that that impact will vary depending on where that particular Londoner is in their learning journey. I mean, there are Londoners who are quite some distance from the workplace, and there are a range of interventions which will be necessary with them to unlock their potential and bring them to perhaps a higher profile position and some that might serve Colin's membership. So, from the Institutes of Adult Learning perspective, we're very keen to work with the GLA in the closest and most positive way. We're very, keen to have been engaged in the dialogue around the skills and adult education strategy. We feel that we're being consulted with well, and we appreciate that greatly. As I'm sitting here today, it's difficult to articulate to you the benefits of devolution because to a greatest of extents, it's a technical change in the way that we're funded. So I think I would want to concur with Gerry's comments broadly. But we trust that there will be an upside out of the dialogue that we're having with colleagues within the GLA, and that the social benefits of learning will be felt, understood, and invested in.
Thank you.
Thank you. As a local authority provider, so we are already, working closely, with the Mayor's office on a number of projects. For us, we feel that devolution could mean that what we already do, we actually improve upon, because local authorities are absolutely key in terms of all the different services that they can bring together in working, with those who are furthest removed from the job market. But I suppose what I would say is that it's not just about employment. So my colleagues around the table have already talked a lot about employment. It's about the whole person. And a lot of the work that we do means that we are working very closely with our adult social care departments, our children's services. We're working with education, and it's actually about looking at the learner journey in its wider sense. So yes, in terms of devolution, we're aware of the challenges around that and understand that it has risks as well as opportunities, and we welcome the opportunity to continue to actually have that dialogue with the Mayor's Office in terms of making sure that there aren't any unintended consequences with the way in which the new contractual arrangements will operate. Because I suppose one of our concerns is that, yes, there's a devolution of the AEB, but we will also have other contracts that we still need to deliver to. So in terms of our traineeships, that's not included. The loans funding is not included. If we have people who are actually outside of London, again, there might need to be separate arrangements for that. So it's making sure that the bureaucracy of that is actually minimised. Now, one of the key things for us as a local authority provider is that we feel very strongly that we could actually leverage in additional resource by actually working much more closely together. And we feel that the part we play within the sector is actually providing those pipelines, particularly at the lower levels, because I think, as Andrew said, there are a lot of the people that we work with who are really some distance away from the job market. I'll give you a very quick example. We work currently very closely with our early years team, and we deliver out in children's centres. And when we actually start with a lot of those learners, they are not literate even in their own languages, so we're actually taking them from what we call pre-entry level and taking them up to a level 2 qualification to actually then work within those childcare settings. We're then actually working with other childcare providers within the local authority to provide work placements for them and then eventually progress them onto apprenticeships. So that's just quite a simple model of where we would actually, because we're the local authority provider and we have a very good relationship with our early years team, we can actually identify young mothers, young fathers who are there in the community who lack those basic skills and start with them. But actually, in terms of tracking their progress, it's not a quick thing. It does take a long time. I have, recently visited cohorts who we've been working with for 4 years. When we took them, most of them couldn't speak a word of English. And when I went to actually go and see them a couple of weeks ago, 2 of them have actually got jobs within our childcare settings. And that's what we'd like to be able to continue to do.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. We just have to give our excuses of 2 of our members who have to go elsewhere. David, do join me here at front. It'll be just easier to be in our guest eye line.
Chair, may I have a supplementary point? Is that okay?
Yeah, if we can just wait a moment whilst we just shift around, and then so I'll come back to you because I have a question for you. So Gerry, yeah.
Notwithstanding my sort of my opening comments, I think there is something which is actually quite unique about the potential arrangements, which could be very beneficial. I mean, at the moment, the GLA already control capital for London colleges. I think bringing capital and revenue together is something which is very, very sensible. And certainly that disconnect, which we felt as colleges, has not been helpful. If you want to bid for capital, you'd like to feel there's a bit more revenue coming attached to it. Otherwise, you've got a shiny building and can't do anything with it. So that's something we would definitely welcome. I think the other issue that we've had some very interesting discussions, fruitful discussions with Jules and his team around this, is to feel like we're London's colleges and London's providers. I think that's a really important thing for us. Our relationship with the ESFA, so our current funding agency, for a whole range of reasons, has become quite bureaucratic, distant, technical, contractual, rather than a relationship of what together can we do to create a better skill system and a better educational platform for the people that we serve. And everything that we've, all the discussions to echo Andrew's points, have helped with that so far. And I think if we can engender that type of spirit to sort of in the relationships, I think that would be a really positive place to take this forward.
Good. Well, thank you for that, because I was just, for me, your opening remarks just a little bit alarmed because of the whole issue about surely this is a way forward, and you talked about one of the benefits, bringing capital and revenue together with the Mayor of London for Londoners to be able to be skilled up and get into work. So thanks for answering that. But I think following on from what you also talked about, this wouldn't benefit, or this would be problematic for you because you have students with a postcode outside London. And again, just out of interest as a constituency member, and you cover Hackney, and I would have thought that you would be full of London's postcode, given the area that you cover and the need for skilling up that population. So what proportion of your population then is outside
for my college is
London?
4%. It's only 4%, but it's still 4%.
Right.
But if I go out at Redbridge, it's more like 8 or 9%.
Okay.
I think the point is the numbers may not be, seismic, but there is still a point that at the moment we don't need to sort of stop people halfway on the central line and interrogate as to where their postcode comes from.
Okay.
And it sort of represents the porous nature of the London labour market. So we are London-based providers, but our mission is to serve, London. But we also, we do that very, inclusive way. So people say, well, I work in London, I don't live in London. At the moment, we would fund them. Now, we will not stop working with them, but there adds on a layer of bureaucracy because we will then have to still have a residual contract for those learners with the remnants of the SFA post-devolution. It's just a...
Yeah, no, thank you for that. 4% I can understand. I was just thinking that you were into double figures,
No.
which clearly would be a problem for me personally.
Maria might be.
But
Not in Hackney.
I would have to go out and recruit personally for you, because that would not be satisfactory. Can I bring in Assembly Member Twycross and then go over to you?
I also had a follow-up question for you, Gerry, just about the point about devolution, because wouldn't that be the same, your point about it being sort of different systems in places? That would be the case for any country in which devolution is developed at all. So surely within Germany, which I think we would argue from a sort of skills perspective, from sort of things we've heard previously, people would view Germany as having a very well-developed skills sector. But it is probably one of the most evolved countries in Europe. So would you not think that some of these issues you describe are resolvable? I can see that it would be frustrating, but any system can take into account this sort of issue if the right mechanisms are put in place.
No, I think you're completely right. Of course, unless I've missed today's news, I don't think Germany is suggesting leaving Europe, so they may not have quite as big a job as us to do in terms of persuading other countries that their skill system is effective and unified and works well. And I suppose I was just sounding a note of caution around potentially fragmenting routes and pathways, and a lot of our job is explaining this stuff to employers and explaining this stuff to parents, and I think they're just. I think this probably will work. I think we should be confident about it working. Certainly in terms of the way that people have gone about. There's positivity about wanting to make it work. My caution is simply about the fact that when you, and we're one of my sites is opposite Canary Wharf. You want to be able to say you're going to have a coherent skill system. Not that, well, it's a bit different in London for very good reasons and with really good objectives. It's just different, and maybe there's more we can learn from Germany in that. I don't know about the actual implementation.
Partly about getting the narrative right.
I think I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
Can I just about Germany? I mean, of course.
Colin, sorry, Arinola has been waiting.
I think it's okay because
No, come on in.
Okay. I think I was just going to follow on from the point with regards to looking at things like the travel to learn patterns, because I think it's very important that we don't actually inhibit that, because not only do we actually have I work in Westminster, and we actually attract learners from across all of London as well as out of London. And there are a lot of people who actually work in London who will access our provision, and I think we want to encourage that. We, as Londoners, want to actually lead the way in terms of how devolution is actually developed, and we want to actually ensure that there are, we remove unnecessary barriers and we have a clear narrative about what that offer is across London, because I think that's one of the difficulties that we sometimes have as providers in terms of actually explaining what we do and how we do it, not just to employers but also to parents, also to to young people. There is a bit of confusion about what they can actually access. So I think devolution is a great opportunity to actually have a shared message and a shared vision about what we will be offering in terms of skills for Londoners.
Okay, Colin?
Just in the German example, of course, the Chambers of Commerce play a large part and actually do a lot of what the further education colleges, and the same is true in France. In fact, so much so that Hamburg Chamber of Commerce started its own business college, where it funded its own business college. It developed a system, and actually we did some work with goldsmiths to see whether we could replicate in this country, where they have a system where the employers employ the students from day one. They pay for the tuition fees. They pay a wage, a stipend. They get a BA degree, things like shipping and business studies and things like that. And of course, what happens is you overcome this gap where from employers where they say, yes, this person's got the qualification. I think I understand the qualification. I mean, there's a huge confusion about level 1, level 2. You ask any SME what's a level 2 qualification, they've got no idea what that is. But actually, when it comes to this model, they hit the ground running because they've been working there's no student vacation in this business school. They move seamlessly onto, and therefore they're valued members of staff. So I think there are models there where business can play its part. I fully accept that we don't want to increase the bureaucracy, or even this idea of there's only one end to education, and that is a job. Absolutely, I passionately believe that to be not the case. But however, it is a very important part, and business can play its part and shouldn't be seen as necessarily a barrier to that. And there are different models, and across Europe, as I say, the chamber movement plays a huge part, which we don't, of course, because actually in France and Germany you have to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce to be a company. We don't have that advantage in this. Or disadvantage, you might say.
Assemblyman McCurdy.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to check I understood something you said, Gerry, about when you were talking about perhaps 4 to 9% roughly of students, depending on where you are, maybe come from outside London. Was I right in thinking you said for those students you would get some money from the ESFA, in addition to the London adult education budget for people who live outside London?
Well, our assumption at the moment is that we would, if we recruit broadly the same numbers and types of learners that we do at the moment, that instead of me receiving 100% of funding from the agency, I'd receive 96% of that funding from London and 4% of that funding from the agency to cover those students who do not have a London postcode, because that's my understanding of the way the system will work. It's funding for Londoners, not funding for London providers. It may be totally smooth and absolutely no problem at all, and we're back to square one. And who even noticed? It might not be. It may be not an issue. I just think it is. I think we're just a little bit wary that we want this to work, and we don't want there to be a situation where we got caught out by those sort of unnecessary sort of things. But we've got some time to try and work that through. Yeah,
sure. So Jules, on the other side, that means that if a Londoner is in a college outside London, in Essex, you would be paying their fees, sort of thing, if they're using a provider which is located outside London but they live in London. Is that correct?
Would be the case, yes.
Okay.
But largely the flow is into London rather than
Okay. But
It's on the fringes of London, and people
Yeah.
will be outside.
maybe sort of, college in Brentwood or Thurrock or sort of Weybridge or something. But I think, you did mention that, there's 410 providers.
Providers.
But the 300s were outside London. How does that work?
Yeah, well, they're delivering in London though, so it's not all people
they've
going
got-
outside. Yeah, so they'll have an operation, or more likely they'll be subcontracting to somebody
Okay.
already based within London.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So for example, sort of is it like Newcastle College does a lot.
They have
national, don't they? Throughout the country, they have
Yeah.
operations and subcontract to people, as well as have setting up operations.
Okay.
Well, they
No, I
will
just
London
wanted to
provider now.
clarify that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is it not true that some of them are linked with some of the colleges in London? That there are links that London colleges have?
Some of those external
With
providers.
some of those
Yes, and as
external.
Jerry was alluding to just now, in the recent area review, and
Yes.
there have been various mergers. One of those has been, or is, I'm trying to think quite where in the process it is, but it is likely the outcome is that it will be with
With an outside.
with Newcastle College.
Done already, isn't it?
It's done and dusted. Yeah, so it's with it. Yeah.
So is it Lewisham?
Yes.
Lewisham Southwark
Lewisham
is
and
part of
Southwark
Newcastle College
is
Group.
part
yeah.
of Newcastle, which again just add to the complexity of this area. Yeah. My colleague who had to leave was interested in this subject and just asked me to put a question to you, Jules, and to others in terms of moving to the outcome-based funding. Surely this will mean, or it might mean, a reduction of the number of prime providers. Is there a threat that if that happened, you could then lose some bespoke providers? Is there a threat in that?
I would not envisage it being a threat to a bespoke operation. I don't think any move that there'll be to rationalise that kind of 400, I don't think it's going to impact the kind of people around this table or the niche providers that aren't served by the mainstream colleges in London. So I wouldn't envisage that. I think it's where it's those who might be at a disadvantage, I would have thought, are the ones that effectively are just handling the money, not actually the people who are doing the delivery.
It's the sort of agents in the middle. Andrew, does it concern you, this move to outcome-based funding in terms of your adult learning providers?
I'm very encouraged, I have to say, in terms of what we're hearing from Jules and his team in terms of an understanding of the wider impacts of learning, so the social outcomes. And I think it'll be really interesting as we go sort of further into the process to think about the framework and an agreed framework that as providers we might subscribe to then demonstrate the impact of the learning from both the employability perspective and the social impact perspective. But I think you're right. I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity just to sort of voice a note of risk, I guess, in the sense of this sense of when one is left with the proportion which isn't related to statutory entitlements. That's very much the territory that the Institutes of Adult Learning would be within. We have a substantial number of students who are with us for work which is funded through statutory entitlements, English, Maths, ESOL, IT. But quite a lot of it is what's called non-regulated learning. So very, adult education budget which we can use in a flexible, bespoke way, which is designed to meet the needs of our learning community. So, it's just a note of caution really as a provider that the value, we want to make the case, I guess, for the value of the work that we provide. We sense that case is being listened and responded to positively. And we'll do all we can to demonstrate that there's great value in the work that we do. The Institutes of Adult Learning are part of the fabric of London for more than a century, I can wax lyrical about the benefits we bring in a whole range of ways, including to very high-powered, very well-employed individuals of London who pay for the experience of learning with us, as well as those who are furthest from the workplace. So the diversity of London is alive and well within institutions such as my own, and that's something which I think is worth, supporting.
Yes, no, thank you. Can I just have one question, or do you want to come in?
No, that's fine. I was going to echo. I've been to Morley College. I was going to make a point about what they do, but you carry on.
Yeah. No, it's back to. It's just that, Jules, as part of our SEND review that we're doing, we heard repeatedly from parents and schools that a lot of further education providers are limiting the number and levels of courses they offer to students with higher SEND needs. We were in Newham and heard this on Monday. How will you ensure that this outcome-based system will not incentivise providers to prioritise the higher level academic courses over those at a more accessible level? And I think it's what Maria was talking about, the entry-level skills.
Well, in May we'll be publishing the framework, the commissioning framework that's, as I say, flows from, we'll be publishing at the same time as the strategy. And I think it's through that we'll be outlining what the mayor's offer will effectively be. And I think it's through that we can make sure that we have the right spread of offer. That we're asking colleges to, some colleges are grant funded, as I say, as far as the independent providers are concerned, which, as I said earlier, it will be a procurement process. We can make it clear through there about our expectations for delivery.
Okay, and just to be sure, you're clear you're going to be launching in May. It's just I've seen a grid of strategies and I can't recall your strategy being in the grid. You are definitely launching in May?
Let me just check, because I'm sure it is May. I will come back to you. Give me a moment, Gerry, if you want to.
Okay, just be confirming, because it's important, because people will be picking up this information. Again, I think that's what we have at the moment, but it's an ongoing piece of work, as I've said to you, that we're involved in. So let's go to section 3. On empowering Londoners, and let me call upon my colleague, Assembly Member Twycross, to start the questioning in this area.
Thank you. Jules, this question is for you, and I wondered if you could say a bit about what your ambitions are as to how Londoners will benefit from the devolution of the adult education budget.
Well, I say, notwithstanding the importance of lifelong learning, the benefits to social well-being outcomes, which we absolutely recognise, that nevertheless the Mayor has put a lot of store, both in his manifesto and City for All Londoners, and statements he's made since, about the need to, that Londoners deserve the opportunity to really access high quality adult education to develop the skills they need to get into work or advance in work if they are already employed. And so that is definitely the number one priority. We're after a comprehensive localised skills system that is responsive to, and coming back to the previous question, that's responsive to the diverse needs of the capital's population. So that's probably the headline.
Thank you. Ask. And I wonder if the providers could comment on the next question, which is what can be done to improve provisions to support those wanting to re-enter the job market or progress in their careers. What kind of support do you think they need, and are there new things that you will want to try to engage adults to improve their skills? So maybe I'll start with Andrew.
Thank you. I mean, one of the words which Colin used earlier was synthesis, synthesise views. And there's a really interesting opportunity in the sense of a common language in terms of what we mean by employability. Because employability enables Londoners to get ahead in life and work. So that, you know, I would be really interested and enthusiastic to sort of get behind a new conversation about what we mean by employability collectively, and therefore how we can recognise that within the learning that we provide within our colleges. Because, you know, employability, our own approach at Morley is to look at employability, you know, in three particular sort of component parts in terms of cognitive skills, personal attributes, and then all forms of communication. So employability isn't a moment in time, it's something which develops over time, and I think that would be certainly something that we could do differently and recognise differently. And, you know, with the team here at the GLA being at the centre of some new brokered relationships between colleges and employers.
I commend Morley College for being a member of the London Chamber of Commerce, and sorry, a shameless plug, and we would welcome any of the other colleges. We have a number of education providers and skills providers as members, and I hope we're able to inform decision making.
Okay, following that commercial break,
exactly.
I'll bring in
I didn't work right to deal on
Arinola.
stage.
No, that's fine.
I think, you know, yes, I would echo what Andrew has just said. It's really about looking, you know, at the various skills that, you know, people need, not just for work, and I must emphasise that, I can't emphasise that enough, because work and life are integrated.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if we just focus purely on employment as the sole measure, we will lose a lot of good. And that's one of my concerns as a provider, that there could be a real narrowing of the offer, you know, in terms of what we're able to provide people with, so that they can be a bit more ambitious, aspirational. It's not just about, you know, the skills that you have to get on with an employer, but it's also the skills that you need to actually negotiate, for example, with, you know, your child's teacher at school, which we find a lot of our learners actually lack. So we feel that there's an opportunity, you know, with devolution to actually, you know, have a common language, to actually have a curriculum for Londoners, because that's one of the things we started talking about at our sub-regional group, that we wanted to really start exploring, you know, how we could have a curriculum for Londoners which embrace not just, you know, it's not the work skills, it's the work skills, the life skills, you know, and making sure that those are available to people at different, you know, parts of their lives. So all the way from, you know, adulthood to actually, you know, when they retire, when they actually are then providing support for the next generation to come. Because we can't forget about intergenerational learning as well. Our older people have a lot, you know, of value to actually add, you know, for our young people, to make sure that they're preparing them for work as well. And my worry is that if we narrow the offer, we won't be able to actually provide those people with those opportunities. And then just one final point in terms of looking at things around community cohesion, social inclusion. That is one of the biggest areas where we feel we impact on, because we work across the range. We deal with 16-year-olds, but our oldest learner at the moment is 95 years old. And she comes in twice a week and works, and actually is providing some support in digital skills for other older learners who actually don't have those skills. And we think the fact that we have the flexibility within the funding to do that at the moment is great, and we would like to see that continue, because that is what it is in terms of empowering Londoners to continue to live active, productive lives.
Yeah, thank you. I'll bring Gerry in and then Maria.
I think I really want to support Arinola's comments around that, and I think one of the potential big wins for the GLA in this is to really look again at some of the rules that we operate under at the moment. So Andrew mentioned before about the use of non-regulated. In other words, it's not a qualification, and it doesn't probably need to be a qualification in lots of cases, but, you know, general further education colleges have been told for a long time, you know, it's qualifications only, you know, and to really reduce the amount of non-qualification work that we do. I think there is, because it was seen as softer and, you know, not really, I think within some carefully controlled parameters there's an opportunity to free up and have some more imaginative approaches that do exactly answer your point about getting people into work without necessarily having to have that attached to a qualification.
Okay, thank you. Maria.
Really, just to finish off, talking about social inclusion, because I think as a sector, the F&HE sector is very much community-based. We see ourselves as institutions provided by the community for the benefit of communities. And that may range, although I've talked a lot about employability and getting people back into work, you know, it might range from SEND provision, entry-level provision, right up to higher education. And it's about making sure that each of us is responding to the needs of our communities effectively with the support of the GLA and making sure that we can't be all things to all men, but if we have a specialism, we will respond to that.
Women.
Sorry.
Indeed.
I've lost my thread.
Totally thrown you.
And that, you know, we adapt according to the needs of our residents and communities rather than stay as we are.
That's great. Thank you, and well done for recovering your thread. We've had quite a feminist morning this morning with votes on the 100 years centenary and things like that as well. So it's actually another interesting point would be how we make sure that we get diversity in terms of gender across the piece in sort of colleges and what you're doing on that piece. But that's probably a debate for another day. Says the chair, yes. Please carry on with your questions, Fiona. Okay, the next question, and I'm going to start again with Andrew, because I know that you do a lot of ESOL at Morley, and I went in actually when I was a new Assembly member and was given a tour of the college, and I'd recommend any Assembly members who have the opportunity to go and visit, because the range of classes you were carrying out, I think it was just Friday morning, was just incredible, and the sort of the range of class, I think it was from IT through ESOL to the one that I wanted to go back and do, but never, I think I'll have to wait till I retire, was sort of felt hat making, which was just, so an incredible range of courses. It's really about capacity and what you can do to increase capacity, particularly around ESOL provision, which is obviously really vital if we're going to make sure that people have the language skills they need to get on in London.
There's no shortage of demand. I mean, it does vary within the geography of London. So the short answer to your question is additional funding to enable more Londoners to participate in ESOL learning. I mean, obviously, a lot of our ESOL learners are co-funded, so they pay a fee and then they're partly funded by adult education budget. And to give you a sense of that, I mean, a low-income ESOL learner would pay about £540 a year. So for that particular learner, it's not an insignificant sum, or rather it is a significant sum for them to pay to support their learning. But in terms of the ESOL provision, the virtue of the provision at Morley is its flexibility. It's all 5 levels. It's, you know, the flexibility to join us for a morning, an afternoon or an evening, 5 or 6 days a week. But the capacity issue is primarily one of funding.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of how you would define low income, just for the purpose of our investigation, what kind of incomes would you imagine those people who are paying?
£330.
Yeah, £330. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what their monthly income would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that is
£330. Sorry, or more a weekly income.
So, but that's still trying to work out what the
month. I'm being
irrespective. It's a relatively low income, and we can clarify that. But I think that what would make a difference in terms of, I mean, do you talk to people who don't take up the course offer? I mean, I think that's one of the things that's interesting in terms of the capacity. You've got your capacity, but then you've got people who choose or choose not to take up courses. Do you do any monitoring around, or is there any monitoring maybe through the GLA on the number of people who don't take up courses because they're put off by the cost?
I mean, all I can offer is a sort of anecdotal response. I could certainly look into it in more detail and provide a written response. My sense of it is that the market sort of regulates itself. Students are aware within their communities what the costs of the courses are, and, you know, to put it bluntly, the length of the queue to enrol on a course is regulated by the amount that the student will have to pay to join us. You know, our courses are set at the most affordable level that we can manage. Gerry mentioned earlier today about the margins on which we operate, and we're a charitable institution, so there's no virtue in pricing ourselves any higher than absolutely necessary. But, you know, it's a material cost to the student, and that will then cause them to be able to make their decision. So the short answer is, there will be students in central London who aren't accessing ESOL because they can't afford to.
We have noticed that exactly what Andrew is talking about since the introduction of the benefits cap. I'm going to be a little bit cautious here because it's not my area of expertise, but just what my enrolment staff have fed back to me is that the benefits cap is clearly a very big deal in London, and there is a way in which, by earning actually a very, very modest income, potential students can lift themselves out of that benefits cap and they still get access to having their housing benefit, whatever paid. But by doing so, they will then become, in our language, co-funded learners and liable for a fee. It's a classic poverty trap. It's in our enormously thick rule book at the moment, and it's one of those things which is the demand absolutely for ESOL is there, but when students are faced with, very, very low income students faced with a big fee, that's a barrier.
Yeah. So did courses,
not easy to resolve.
Courses, do they tend to be oversubscribed?
Most courses, yes. Most courses are oversubscribed. And yes, I can absolutely echo that as well. Over the last, I would say, probably 2.5 years, we've seen that becoming more and more of a problem with us having to actually turn students away. And, because I think up until about 5 years ago, it was free, so everyone could access it. But once that was removed and we had to actually fee assess, it became a lot more challenging for a lot of our learners. And they are, classic example. One of the learners who wanted to access provision up our Pimlico site said to me, "Well, I'm a cleaner, I get I think it was £190 or something like that," he was saying, because he doesn't, it's actually on a 0 hours contract, was the other thing he actually said. And, I have to make a choice. Do I actually pay for my heating? Do I pay, for food? Or do I actually pay for this course? And actually right now, I've done the first semester, I can't actually continue, and chose not to enrol, which is such a shame, because actually the problem as well is that when they start on that journey, if they don't continue it to its conclusion, they regress. Yes. And then actually they're having to start that journey all over again. And we are finding that that's happening more and more with a lot of our ESOL learners.
Yeah. Do you have similar experience, Maria?
It's slightly different in the outer London boroughs. Our demand for ESOL is relatively much lower than it would be in any of these colleges, but it is growing. The demography is changing. We're anticipating an increase in it for next year.
Okay, so the main obstacle is funding for the students, not the capacity of the colleges to deliver the courses.
I mean, the funding is reduced. The note I have is from 60% reduction since 2009. So it's a substantial change nationally, and that obviously impacts locally.
Okay. I think that's something that we might like to come back to as an education panel, actually. It's something that's, I think the Assembly's got quite a strong interest in sort of ESOL learning anyway. So I think, and Jules's thoughts at some point would be welcome as well, I think, because it's quite a significant issue if people can't access the skills they need through lack of funding and comparatively low pay. Moving on though, bringing Colin, how can the GLA providers and business support retraining to create an agile workforce that can respond to a changing economic environment?
I think that I would say what I said before, which is if you can involve us in the process of this devolution of money, I think we can promise that businesses will try to play their part and make sure that there's a greater understanding. I think one of the problems is there is a lack of understanding between businesses and educational establishments, especially at the smaller end of those businesses. And I think more participation in the process, and that would be up to us to try and ensure happening, would help that. And I think that we would hope to make. And I'd just like to echo again, I am not saying that the be-all and end-all of adult education is getting a job. However, it is an important byproduct, and I think it is something by which one of the things that further education, adult education, should be judged by. Not necessarily the only thing by any stretch of the imagination, but one of those things.
Do any of the providers want to comment on that?
I don't think we would disagree with that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying you would, but,
No, okay.
yeah.
Is there anything to add? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
but I think your worry is that if we get, you could characterise this, may not be your worry, but if business is too much involved, then the whole emphasis and maybe the money going to those colleges will be overburdened into, well, how many jobs did your college provide, and you will be just as one of our criticisms at the moment of the education system is talking to head teachers, is that the need to demonstrate exam results overcomes everything else. And if you say to them, yes, but surely it's about the outcomes for your students, i.e., in our case, in terms of jobs, and they say, look, I haven't got time to think about that because what I'm judged by is the exam results. I think it's just trying to change, to leaven that mix.
I think maybe talk to principals rather than head teachers. Yeah. I think one of the issues we would have with that, some of it's absolutely true. I don't think it's universally true. I think there's plenty of examples. I mean, one of the issues we have is, we're incredibly well placed. My Shoreditch campus in terms of access to Silicon Roundabout and all those sorts of things. But when you're dealing with some companies whose policy is for every level of job, we'll recruit a graduate, and we can recruit them from anywhere in the world, that makes life difficult, even if you're half a mile away. And if you can help us broker those relationships, or your organization, that would be fantastic.
And that's
what there are those.
I accept that, and of course that's going to change.
Well, yes, in about a year probably.
In about a year's time, that will become more difficult to do. Now that's not an excuse why we shouldn't be doing it in the past, but I do think that acknowledgement. That businesses may have different views to educational establishments about what the values are, and I think part of that is engaging people in the process. So therefore, your point about what the qualification that's the only thing people are interested in may not be such a big thing in employers' mind if they are part of that process.
And Jules, is your role that brokerage role?
Jules is going to make it all happen.
Not me on my own.
Perfect.
Not you on your own. No, not you on your own.
We're establishing a team to do that very thing, and the structure should be there. And to come back to the question earlier about May, it is indeed May, and that we'll be publishing the skills and funding framework, and alongside the final skills strategy. And so that skills and funding framework will set out the GLA's funding priorities for the AEB, and our approach to commissioning and allocating those funds.
Thank you. I've got one final additional question that isn't on the list, if I may, Chair, which is, I'm just interested, because obviously this is about sort of retraining people who might have already had quite significant education previously. I mean, they may or may not have had previous educational track records. In terms of retraining, do providers find many issues with the rules around equivalent level qualifications and funding? Is that a particular issue that you come across in terms of people saying they can't get funding to do courses because they've already got higher level qualifications?
Yes.
Yes, and you push them down a loan route. That's that is an issue. And I think it was only yesterday we had an organisation doing a survey on behalf of the DFE about the introduction of loans for 19 plus, not just for 24 plus, and there are clearly a whole range of issues about driving down participation. It's one of the reasons why it looks like we're not spending all the money we're given. You put together the combination of the issues that Andrew referred to earlier around ESOL and the difficulty around co-funded students there, and you add that to students who, absolutely, I want to retrain. I've got my qualification at school, but actually not brilliant at getting me into a job. And I want to train to be a chef, and I don't really fancy taking out a loan to do that, even if it's a soft loan and it's all of those things. And I think that's difficult. And I do think that even if we do an absolutely superb job on that, we'll still have a disconnect between general policy around funded students and loanable students. And at some stage, it would be good if we bring it all together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Can I just have a question to Colin? You spoke earlier about you had explored some sort of work with goldsmiths.
Yes.
What happened?
The recession happened. We, having looked at this Hamburg model, which I have to say went down very badly with the university, the old university in Hamburg, the idea that the Chamber of Commerce was starting its own business school for further education. They got very upset about it. But from what I'd seen, I've been a visitor a number of times because we have a close relationship with Hamburg. It seemed to be an incredibly good model where you got over that hurdle of employability. Yes, you give a person a job, but it may be another year before they're any real use to you in that further education role. That you had a situation where the employer was paying for it, but willingly paying for it. That they were working roughly half the time in the company itself. So, as I say, at the end of their degree, as it was a degree level, they were absolutely integrated into things. We have a report which was funded. We have an education charity because, of course, at one stage the Chamber provided, which has now been taken over, Pearson's. And if you look in sort of Hong Kong Gazette, you'll see LCCI qualifications needed in bookkeeping and various things like that. Pearson's now run that. But we have a charity which then funded some work into whether that could be transposed. The problem was, of course, that Hamburg Chamber of Commerce is rich as Croesus because every company has to pay a percentage of their turnover. I think it is not maybe profit or turnover, whatever it is. It's a huge amount of money if you've got Mont Blanc, you've got Siemens, you've got all those big things. So they've got a lot of money to be able to fund that. But they built in the centre of Hamburg a whole new faculty, which was, and I think there is a model there about businesses when they see a real advantage, i.e. they're not wasting a year in terms of getting people ready to have paying for that. And also the other bit was that not only were they putting money into it, they were putting their staff into it. So actually, when you are moving perhaps staff down the ladder and time for retirement or thing, you were saying also, why don't you go and teach in this thing? It's a great. We have the report, which I would gladly share with everybody.
Yeah. Because I suppose that's the sort of model that the UTCs were around, weren't they? But I know that it started off well with a lot of enthusiasm, but it was very difficult to get businesses to engage in them. And you're left up being asked all the time, what's businesses' import?
Yeah.
At the start.
And I think what our plan was going to be, actually with Goldsmiths, was to start it off actually with some German companies in London, because lots of big German companies, Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Bahn, those are the people who are actually involved in it, and try and set up in a small way an experiment at Goldsmith where we had the same model, and then try and bring in bigger companies and smaller companies, because it's not just big companies that take part in it, to look at this model and say, actually, this works. Now, I remember sounding off about this at some party where I met some from the University of London who then was coruscating about it. What's the business doing, trying to get involved in higher education? And anyway, but as I say, it would take an awful lot of time, effort and money to get off the ground. But there is a model there that works.
You have my support.
Okay. Money. You're going to provide money.
Well, no, we're going to encourage Jules' money to go into exciting ways. Jules has got the money, and we urge Jules where he should be spending this, and the mayor's got the money. Okay. So, just a couple of questions. Just a couple of questions back to Jules. In terms of social entrepreneurs and self-employed. They're all within your picture, within your framework, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. Part of another strand will be to promote entrepreneurship as well as part of the framework.
Yeah. And it's not because we're doing this piece of scrutiny, it's because they are a population that are growing and that they're relatives and carers have now found a voice at last, and it is young people with SEND. And so we know that you're committed to actually be looking at the provision, and that the Mayor set off a SEND review. Do you know when that review will be published and reporting?
No, I'm sorry, that's not under me.
That's not under you.
No.
So how have there... okay, so in terms of you did some engagement meetings in terms of bringing together your strategy. How have the...
sorry, I'm just going to have to...
Yeah, how are the direct needs articulated by parents and teachers of SEND young people being included in the work you've done to date then? That will come out of your strategy. Just a minute, let me just...
Gerry will be able to...
I'm able to help that SEND funding for students aged 16 to 24 is not part of the AB budget, so it's not devolved.
So it's not devolved?
No.
But it doesn't mean to say that there are not young people with SEND needs that could... that money could be spent on, because isn't it only...
They're not SEND services, though.
They're not SEND services.
I mean, it's entirely possible that SEND young people with disabilities and special needs are availing themselves of courses.
Yeah.
But if it's specific SEND services.
If they've got their, if they've got
HCP.
If they've got their education
care
plan, then they're out with that. But not all of them have this plan.
If they're a 16 to 24-year-old student with an EHCP, then they're funded by the ESFA.
But if
they are non-declared or they are without that plan,
then they would fall.
And they are over 19, then they could fall within the scope of this budget.
Then they would be falling in the scope.
But it just only in the same way that any other student.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's why it's kind of out of my scope of knowledge.
Right. But you would have to, like how you're going to monitor in how it's impacting on, as you know, the diversity of London, be looking to monitor how those young people who don't have their plan are accessing skills. Yeah. Okay. Now, what about the Careers Advice Service? What relationship will you be having with that? Because it hasn't been in good shape to now from the work that we've done previously. So will you have a relationship with the Careers Advice Services in London?
Well, we want to work really collaboratively with the National Careers Service. We want to ensure that the service offer in London is improved, better responds to London's economic and social needs. I mean, the Mayor's been very clear that he'd like to see that service devolved as well in London, and it to be an accessible all-age careers offer.
Okay, lovely. We've come to the end of all our planned questions. Assembly Member Twycross, any other questions? Do our witnesses have anything that they want to tell us that we haven't touched on? If you don't want to do it in public, you can write to us.
Just one thought, that we've used the term lifelong learning, and Arinola mentioned those who are in retirement, and that sense of us all hopefully living a bit longer, and the phases of life between education, career and retirement fragmenting, developing in interesting ways. And of course, where we think about education perhaps now as at the start of life, you know, we really do need, and we will want to within the capital, think about lifelong learning and retraining and opportunities to learn at every stage of life, both formally and informally. So again, another exciting opportunity.
I'm definitely going to come and do your hat course when I
Jolly
get
good.
any opportunity.
Thank you very much.
I think we'd like to thank you for asking us to come and talk to you.
No, thank you so much.
But also, if there is an opportunity to come back and talk to you specifically about ESOL, if you would like us to do that, I'm sure we'd be quite happy to do that.
And absolutely, I was just going to say about how the panel works, that we're working out there getting first-hand information all the time. So just because you see 3 meetings, that's not what we're about, because you heard we were in Newham on Monday and we're all over London. And we welcome contributions. And I can say, well, David and I are 2 of the members. We're going to be visiting Morley College, if they'll have us.
Good, lovely.
So we'll beg an invitation and we'll work our diaries around to come out and see you, definitely. I've got pages and pages of notes. It's been so informative, and we've got loads of notes which we'll collate. But please do write to us. Invite us to come out and see what you're doing, because it's with evidence and you know, like first-hand evidence, when we can quote what we've heard back to the Deputy Mayor or to the Mayor through Mayor's Question Time or any other fora that we have, that we can then look to see the change and to deliver the product that Londoners need. So thank you to all our guests today. Thank you to our Deputy Mayor, and of course you were my favourite, but today I announced another Deputy Mayor, so you know, maybe competition there.
I used to be your favourite mayor until the London mayor came.
Yes, you just keep moving around the place. Yes, absolutely. So thank you all for coming, and it's just been so rich, and you know, we will be in contact with you, and we'll clearly share a summary of this meeting with you. Thank you. So can the panel then please note the report and the subsequent discussion we've had today. And then just to say to the panel, the work programme, you can see the notes about the topics we've covered during 17-18, and you know of our ongoing piece of work on SEND, which because of the elections in Canada, we will be launching after, but it will be richer for it. Can I ask the panel to delegate authority to me in consultation with party group leaders to agree the topic of the panel's first meeting in 2018-19, that's following the AGM. We've got a long list of issues which we can choose from. Agree any written outputs relating to the panel's investigation into the work that we're doing to date regarding SEND, so that maybe we can pull together a provisional document that we can look through and be advised on, because we want this to be, if you like, a landmark document that we're... Is it landmark? I mean, oh well, an excellent document that we're producing. Thank you. As we've said about being out and about, working with myself and members and Samira to get some community engagement about those issues in front of us. So thank you, members. Just leaves me to say that the date of the next meeting is scheduled post the Assembly's AGM, so it's subject to an agreement at the Assembly's annual meeting, but it's in the schedule to be held on the 13th September 2018.
Seems a long time away.
It does. It's because May. It's because there's May. We've got to launch a report.
So I know we don't normally have questions, but that does seem an awful long way away.
It's June, July, and nothing happens in London in August. Is that right?
Okay, fine.
It's a bit like, you know, who's in London in August?
I think the correct response from me was noted, not
noted.
really.
But I've given you an explanation, and it does seem far away. But as I say, we'll be doing loads of things in between times. And so, item 8, any other business? There are no urgent business, and so that concludes the meeting today. And again, thank you to our witnesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. End of.